In this lecture, we're prefabbing our game objects so that we have them down in a folder, we have some blueness in our hierarchy, and everything hopefully should work as it's been working. So let's get started. Let's start this conversation with a couple of quick definitions. A prefab is a reusable asset that represents a game object or a group of game objects or a collection of game objects, and it's something that we save to our hard drive as a .prefab, and an instance is a specific copy of a prefab in our scene. So you'll hear me talk about these two a lot, prefab and instance, in this particular lecture. I'm going to start by finding my projectiles and enabling all of those, or turning them all on, if you will, so I can see them all. So when we made these, we just duplicated, which is fine to do, but we run into the issue of if I want, say, them all to be a little bit bigger, I change one, I have to change another one, I have to change another one. Maybe I can copy the exact scaling on each of them, or I can delete them and reduplicate them again. Either way, it's a bit of a pain in the butt to do that. And if I accidentally delete them all, then they're gone for good. It's very, very difficult to get them back unless I Control-Z or Command-Z, which I'm going to do right now. So that's just a couple of starting reasons why prefabs are pretty handy. We've already felt a little bit of the pain, which is good. And now let's remove some of that pain by prefabbing. I'm going to highlight on projectile 1 down on projectile 4. Just delete those. Don't need them anymore. And I've got my main projectile. I'm just going to drag that under trigger volume so it's sitting down here on its own, which is cool. And the process of prefabbing this is, well, first of all, let's make a folder down in our project directory. Click on Assets, right-click, Create Folder, and we'll call this Prefabs. You don't have to put them in a Prefabs folder for this to work, but it's good to keep ourselves organized, isn't it? I'm going to now go to the hierarchy, find the game object that I wish to prefab, and just drag that down into the project area, into my prefabs folder, blump, and it has turned that into a prefab. So just here, this particular asset we've got sitting here is a prefab, and you can see when I click on it, it shows me .prefab. If I was to go into Show in Explorer, we'll see there it is, a .prefab file of 4 kilobytes that's sitting right on my hard drive. So this is now saved to my hard drive. That's a great way to share particular things from game to game. If you go to the asset store and purchase an asset, then you'll be able to download it as a package file, and usually that package will have a bunch of prefabs in it. Prefabs can live on your hard drive. And now that I've turned that into a prefab, this game object is an instance of the prefab. If I delete that, oh, it's gone. No, it's not. I can just drag the prefab back into the hierarchy and it reappears again. I can drag it another time, hit W, and you can see I've now got 2 in there. It's magic. I could also drag from my assets folder into the world itself, and you can see there it snaps to the thing in the world, which is handy if you want to have something placed like on the plane or an object, etc. And then you can move it to wherever you want it to be. If I drag it into the hierarchy, it will have the same coordinates as when I first created my prefab. So you see that's why it lands right over the top of the prefab that I created first of all. Now let's say I wanted to increase the size of all of these projectiles. Let's make them all bigger. Yeah, that'd be kind of neat. There's a few ways to do this. One way, I can just go double click on the prefab that's down in my folder, double click on that, and that takes me into a view where I'm just looking at that particular prefab. And from within here, I just hit R to scale it up. Or I could type the scale in here, 1.5. I'll do that just so it's nice and neat, 1.5 and 1.5. So in my scale fields, I'm just putting in 1.5 for each of those. Now, if I go up to the very top of my hierarchy on the left, you see the little arrow next to my projectile prefab. Click on that, takes me back out into here. And now each of these projectiles is 1.5 in size. I could also find any one of my instances. It doesn't need to be the original one because, you know, hey, we might have deleted the original one and then dragged it back in, which is totally possible that we've done. It's not about the original instance. It's just about one of them. And if I was to go into the scale now and change that to say 1, 1, 1, 1, it will change just that instance. But if I look at it and say, I want all of my prefabs to be that size, I can go into this spot where it says overrides right underneath the name of the prefab. Overrides, click on that, and you can see revert all, which means, oh, I changed my mind, don't do that. Or apply all, which means now make that the new standard for the prefab. And if I click on that, bloop, the prefab down here changes and all of the instances change. Now there's an important exception to this rule, and I'll show that using materials. So if I click on materials, I'm going to drag in the black spinner color over to there. Well named because it's not a spinner anymore. I'm going to click on that and call that dark green. You don't need to do that, but it just makes me feel a little bit silly when I'm using something called spinner to put onto a ball. If I click on this dark green object, so projectile 3 for me, but it doesn't matter which one, go to overrides. You can see there's a change to the mesh renderer, apply all, blump, all of these turn to that dark green color. If I was to go and click on one of these and drag the other sort of green over the top of that, then it will remain the other sort of green, which is totally cool. If I click on that and apply this override, then all of them will go to that other green. However, if I was to go and click on this one here, this other object, change that to say brown, dropper, also poorly named. Let's just rename this to, actually it's not brown, it's orange. Orange while I'm here. Okay, so I've got orange, I've got green, I've got dark green. So now what's going to happen if I click on something and apply to the prefab? So if I click on this orange that I've just changed and say overrides, apply all, it made them all orange, but no, it didn't. This one just here is not orange. The reason that is once you make an exception or a change on the instance remembers that change. So I made this one orange and that one green, and I said, hey, prefab update to be orange, and all of these things that hadn't had a change from the prefab are now orange. If I was to click on this here and hit overrides apply all, what do you think would happen? They should all turn green. Like, why is that? Hang on, but didn't you make this one orange? I did, but I made it orange, and then I said, you are now the prefab. You are now the standard. You're now the normal prefab, and once you do that, it doesn't think we've made a difference from the instance, and it says, okay, any changes to the prefab will update to you as well. So I know I got a little bit convoluted near the end there, but basically have a play around with it while we've got our projectiles on the screen. Have a play around, change the color, and then hit overrides and see what changes. And now if I change the color of that, and if I change the color of this, and I make this one the override, what happens? I make this one the projectile using override, what happens? And so that philosophy applies whether it's size, so I can get here and increase the scale, increase the scale, overrides apply all, and all of the scales increase. So it's based upon each component or each change that you make. So just because these have different colors and it's saying I'm always going to stay orange even if you tell me to update, that's cool. The material color is independent to the scale, is independent to whatever components we have on it, etc. So we can get lots of control over how our prefab looks and how our instances look. So I'm just going to delete my other 3 instances back to my prefabs folder. What we'll do now is we'll prefab our other things that we should prefab, and there's a general rule of thumb which is prefab everything that you can prefab. So we have a trigger volume here. Yeah, I'll prefab the trigger volume in case we want to have other trigger volumes. I can just drag down another trigger volume and another trigger volume and another trigger volume if I wanted to do that. Just undo those because I don't, at this stage, want so many trigger volumes, but I could do that. And then we'll prefab the player. It's important to have our player prefab. That's good, particularly if we want to make any changes or in the future when we're loading from scene to scene and we want to have the player persist, etc. So prefab the player. The ground, yeah, let's prefab the ground as well because we can. The global volume, we don't need to prefab that. That's something that was brought in when we started. Same with directional light and the cameras, so we won't worry about prefabbing those. Environment, I'm going to go ahead and prefab one of my walls by dragging that down and prefabbing that, and then I'm going to delete the other 3 and then just quickly recreate those 3 back into the world, knowing that if I want to make any changes, they're all now linked to the prefab. So there is a little bit of redo, a little bit of refactor we're going to do here at the moment. So double work, but I wanted to make the point of how we get these things into our world. So that there, and then one more. And interestingly, what I can do is I can hit Control D to duplicate, and that will duplicate the instance, and it will still be an instance of this prefab. So we don't have to drag every time, drag. You can still be duplicating from within the hierarchy. So I've got my walls laid out. Why would I bother doing that? Well, as I've said before, if I want to go into the wall, my wall prefab, and from within here, I can either double click to look at it in isolation, or I'm going to click back out of that. I just can click on the prefab itself. I can go and change, say, the scale of this on the X. Boop, and let go, and there it is. Our walls have just got a little bit chunkier, and that applied instantly to all of the instances because I'm working right on the prefab. And you can see up here there's nowhere to apply to the prefab that we had before. Let me just show you up here on wall. There's this overrides. There's none of that when I'm clicked on the prefab because it is the prefab. There's no way of saying, hey, apply to yourself because it is yourself. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm actually going to make the X a little bit less chunky than it was just so it's a bit smoother. And let's see, I'm just going to rearrange my hierarchy a little bit by grabbing these walls that are not in the environment anymore, dragging them on top of environment and just lining them all up in the same way. The spinning thing, let's prefab that as well. Now that it's prefab, let me just see if the spinning thing's still working. Actually, I haven't looked at that for a while. The spinning thing has stopped and is broken. Let's have a look at that. Why is the spinning thing not working? Something's gone wrong here. Maybe, and this is what often happens when we prefab things, is it breaks some of those connections and it doesn't know what's going on. If I look into the console, I can see an error up the top here. And this is one of those refactoring things. It's like, oh, I just made it a prefab. But no, we actually deleted some things and added some things. So that's saying make sure you go and tidy things up. The variable player of flight player is not assigned. Okay, so we've gone and broken. This is a good lesson as well. When we have some of these references where we say the projectile understands when we say fly at player, we've got to go and tell it who the player is. If we don't do that, then our game just stopped working. It didn't know what was going on, but we found an error in our console that tells us what's going on there. We just need to reconnect that back up again. So while I'm clicked on projectile, you can see fly at player script. I'm going to click on the selector and choose player. Dodgy the player, there you are, double click on that. Now that should be going. I'm going to clear my console, click on play. Aha, now everything's happy and there's no errors. And the spinner is spinning. Interestingly, we'd broken the projectile, but it was the spinner that stopped spinning. That was kind of our indicator, but it was the clue down in the console as to what we needed to do to fix it. So at the moment, our trigger volume is probably also broken. You see, we've got no projectiles, but to be thorough, let's go through and do those now. So we've got one projectile. I'm going to go duplicate, 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 duplicate. I'm going to move them to the side a little bit, move to the side a little bit. So we're getting back some of the functionality that we had and we've just lost, but that's all good. Move it up a little bit. And in terms of the speed as well, I'll just quickly change a couple of the speeds so they all come at a different speed towards the player. Just very quickly doing it there. And then finally, we go back to our trigger volume and we say who is who. Let's grab our projectile 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and drag them over where we've got our trigger projectile. It should trigger those particular things. Okay, it's pretty good. They're all lined up. Now I need to click on them all, projectile to projectile, and I need to turn them so they're not visible, or else we'll get some errors there as well. So now that they're turned off, when I click on play, just to check that everything's working, when I run through the trigger volume, they all come flying at me. Good, good, good. Destroy themselves. We've got no errors that I can see. So is there anything else we need to prefab in here? Yes, there is. Back to our project folder, back to our prefabs directory, and I'm going to grab our dropping object, because that is something that has we've got some interest in that. Drop that in there. And the obstacles, I don't think we need to worry about the obstacles just at the moment. I'm going to pull out the spinner, so it's not currently in our environment folder, and I'm going to pull out my dropping object so it also is out. So I can see all of my tools in the toolkit. We might do a little bit of grouping in the next lecture, but for now I wanted to cover prefabs. I think we've prefabbed all of the things that we wanted to prefab. We can prefab these obstacles if we want, but I'm not going to worry about it just at the moment. And I think everything else has been prefabbed. So there you go. I invite you to play around with prefabbing, drag things into the scene, drag them out again, change the values, do the override and revert the override so you can see how these things work and get a really good feel for prefabs because they're a very, very key part of using Unity. But that's all for now. I'll see you in the next lecture.